It's pretty hard to immediately understand whether a person is cheating on you or not. To find out, you need to monitor a person's behavior, which seems strange, maybe new habits and all that sort of thing. I can't say that I immediately realized that my wife was cheating on me, but when I realized it, I started acting for sure and wanted revenge. Dean glanced at Dave and said, "I'm starving. How about you grab us some subs from Gino's? I'll cover it. Man, that's across town. It'll take at least 30 minutes. Why don't we just order in? We'll get done faster." I get it, but we deserve a treat and the boss is paying. He never specified we had to go somewhere nearby. All he cares about is us finishing the program ASAP and letting him know when we leave so he can close out our timesheets and set the alarms. Come on, man. All right, you're the boss, Dave said as he got up to leave their workspace, which they called the cave. Traffic was heavy, as Dave expected on a Friday evening. To make matters worse, Gino's was all the way across town and a popular spot. He'd been there once before and had to admit, for bar food, it was the best. Their sandwiches and pizza were top-notch. Dave had to drive through the parking lot twice before finding a spot, which naturally was near the back. On his way to the building, he saw a car that looked just like his wife's, but it couldn't be hers since she was home with her sister, who was visiting on her way home from college. When he arrived at the bar, he approached the register near the kitchen and waited until a waitress came to see what he needed. "I'm Dave Brown. I'm here to pick up a phone order." "Sure, let me check if it's ready," the waitress replied. She went into the kitchen and quickly returned. "I couldn't find any order for you. Are you sure it was placed here?" "Yeah, my colleague placed the order about 20 minutes ago. I drove all the way across town to pick it up." "Are you certain it's not here?" "I can't find any record of it. Who did he speak with?" "I'm not sure. Let me call him." Dave quickly pulled out his phone and called Dean. When Dean answered, Dave asked, "Hey, they don't have our order. Did you call it in?" "Yeah, man. You heard me, didn't you?" "Damn." "Well, just wait for them to make it since you're already there. I'll cover for you. I just spoke with Tony, who was asking how much longer we'd be. I told him at least 2 or 3 more hours, so we have time." Dave confirmed the order details with Dean and turned to the waitress. "He said he placed the order here. Look, I work across town and we're working a late shift. Can you get them to hurry it up so I can get back?" "Sure, honey. What's the order?" Dave gave her the details and took a seat at the bar while he waited. As he observed the other patrons, he was stunned to see his wife Sandy dancing with his boss Tony and her sister dancing nearby as well. What was going on? Dave was about to come over and see what was going on when his world collapsed. Sandy stood on tiptoe, put her arms around her partner's neck, and kissed him. Even from across the room, Dave could see Sandy snuggling up to the guy. Dave had already walked halfway across the room, pushing people aside, when Tony broke off the kiss, turned around, and put his arm around Sandy's waist. He led her off the dance floor to the exit. As they walked, his hand slid down again. Dave quickly took a few pictures and followed them out of the bar. They crossed the parking lot, heading for the row where Sandy's car was parked. Sometimes they stopped to kiss before continuing on their way. During this time, Dave managed to take a couple more pictures. When they reached Tony's truck parked next to Sandy's car, they stopped, and Sandy leaned against the truck. Tony snuggled up to her, and they hugged and kissed again. Soon, Tony pulled back slightly and unbuttoned Sandy's blouse. After a few more kisses, Tony opened the back door of his truck and sat Sandy down in the seat. As soon as the door closed, Dave walked up to the car and saw his once happy life crumbling. Sandy and Tony were close. Outside, Dave could hear all these sounds. Despite the pain in his heart, he took pictures on his phone. He grinned when he heard Sandy ask, "Honey, what's that flashing light?" Tony didn't waste a second answering. "Don't worry about it, honey. Maybe it's just the lights of passing cars. Relax. No one sees us." Dave watched as Sandy followed his advice, and soon they were done. Furiously enraged, Dave wrapped his handkerchief around his head like the old Western bank robbers in the movies, then yanked open the door to confront the two lovers. He dragged Tony out of the truck and delivered a swift, forceful kick to his groin, before rifling through his pockets to retrieve his wallet and keys. He inserted the keys into the truck's tailgate lock but took the wallet with him, hoping that the lovers wouldn't notice the keys and that the truck would be stolen. He planned to toss the wallet out of his window during his drive through the rough part of town on his way back to the office. Dave quickly returned to the bar and resumed his seat. The waitress soon approached and said, "There you are. I thought you'd left or something. Your order's ready." "No, I've been here the whole time. I was over there chatting with a friend. Sorry I didn't catch you earlier." "No worries, here's your food." "Thanks," Dave replied, taking the food and leaving the bar. He took a circuitous route to his car to minimize the chances of being spotted by his unfaithful wife and boss. Just before he reached his car, he saw Sandy helping Tony into the truck and trying to comfort him. Dave drove across town, trembling with anger, nearly causing 2 accidents in the process. Finally, he parked back at the office, carrying the food into the building. He made sure to lock the door behind him and stormed toward the server room where the team was working. When he entered the room with the food, Dean smiled and said, "You're finally back. Why have you been gone so long? Did you come home or something?" Dave threw a bag of food at Dean's workplace and almost collapsed into the chair next to him. Dean turned around and shouted, "What the hell?" He stopped in mid-sentence when he saw Dean's expression and continued, "Oh shit, are you okay, dude?" "Yes. No, not really." Sandy was there. She was intimate with Tony in the back seat of his truck. "Damn it, I'm really sorry, man." "Yes, but it's not your fault." "Actually, it is." Dave turned to Dean, anger showing on his face. He asked, "What do you mean, asshole?" "You know that I am a system administrator. I was doing a routine email check to make sure it was only being used for business purposes when I discovered the correspondence between Tony and Sandy. They planned to meet there tonight. Tony said he wouldn't distract you so they could be alone. I didn't want to say anything in case she changed her mind or it turned out not to be what I thought. So I sent you for sandwiches so you could check everything out. That's why I didn't order. I wanted you to stay longer in case something went wrong. Well, it wasn't like that. I have some photos of them getting close in his truck." "I'm sorry, Dave. What's the next step?" "Do you have to ask?" "I'm going to leave her and quit this shitty job." As expected, neither man accomplished much more work that night. They spent a considerable amount of time discussing Dave's next steps. Dave showed Dean the pictures and explained what he'd done to Tony. Dean laughed and said, "That's great. If Tony shows up at work tomorrow, we need to make sure to give him a hard time, especially if he's moving cautiously." Dave lingered in his chair for a moment before standing up and gathering his things. Dean watched him for a moment before saying, "Hey, are you leaving?" "We're not finished yet, and I can't wrap this up without you." "Yeah, I'm heading out. Screw Tony and his job. Sorry, man." "Dave, hold on. You can't just walk out like this. What's your plan? Are you going to go home and confront him? And what about Tony? You can't just let him get away with this. You need to get organized and plan this out, or you'll end up losing more in the divorce than necessary. Come on, let's finish up and make some plans. They don't need any more warning than you've already given them." It was after 1:30 a.m. when they finally finished their project and were ready to leave. Standing outside the office door, Dean tried calling Tony to remotely lock the doors and set the alarm. But Tony didn't answer. They repeatedly called him and joked about his lack of response. After 20 minutes, Dean called the security chief and explained that they couldn't reach Tony and needed him to lock the door and set the alarm. Just before they got into their cars, Dean said, "You know, this is ridiculous. This is the only place I've ever worked where I don't have a key or the alarm code. If something goes wrong inside during non-business hours, we have to wait around until Tony or the duty security can either meet us here or unlock and turn off the alarms." Dean had a peculiar look on his face before he continued. You know, it just occurred to me. We only have to call Tony when we're working late. I wonder if that's because he's involved with some of the other wives, too. I don't know, but I really don't care. He messed with mine, and I'm going to make him and her pay. I'm exhausted. See you tomorrow. Or, I guess, see you today, later. Sandy still wasn't home when Dave stumbled into their small rental house. He was still seething about what he'd seen and wanted to confront her, yet was relieved she wasn't there. He wondered where she might be, but figured she was probably with that jerk. Dave took a quick shower and collapsed into bed. He fell asleep almost instantly and didn't wake up until the sun blinded him at 9:30 the next morning. He threw back the covers and noticed that Sandy's side of the bed hadn't been slept in at all. Before getting dressed, he shuffled into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. After grabbing coffee, a quick frozen breakfast sandwich, and more coffee, Dave set off for work. He was still fuming and trying to figure out how to make Tony and Sandy pay for what they had done. Upon arriving at work, he found everyone there except Tony. He asked Sheila, Tony's secretary, about his whereabouts, and she replied, "I don't know. No one has heard from him at all." It was a long day as Dave and Dean were still drained from their late-night work, but the project was now in its final stages. The rest of the team was conducting code checks and stress testing the program before installing it on the customer's servers. Dave wandered around, supervising the work and struggling to stay awake, his mind preoccupied with the discovery from the previous night. When quitting time finally arrived, he went home. Sandy was lounging on the sofa with a glass of wine, wearing her old, tattered robe. Dark circles were under her eyes. She looked at him with a guilty expression as he entered the room. Dean immediately said, "Where the hell were you last night? You didn't even call to let me know you wouldn't be home, and then you didn't come back at all. Where's your sister? I thought she was supposed to stay with us for a few days." "She got a call and had to leave early. I took her to the airport yesterday afternoon, and then stopped for a drink with the girls on the way back. It turned out badly. One of them was mugged in the parking lot, and I ended up spending the night in the hospital with her. I'm sorry I didn't call, but my phone battery died." "And you couldn't find a phone in the hospital, borrow a charger, or use your sister's?" "I just didn't think of it. I'm sorry, honey." "Sure. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were out messing around. What's for dinner?" "I haven't figured that out yet. What do you want?" "I'm not sure. Something quick. I'm exhausted. I didn't finish last night until after 1:30, and it was nearly 3 before I got to sleep." "I don't have anything quick to cook. How about I order a pizza?" "Yeah, that works. I'm going to clean up." As Dave showered, he kept pondering how he could get his revenge and resolve the mess Sandy had made of their marriage. While washing, he had an idea that seemed like a feasible way to uncover Sandy's cheating. Tony only had a basic understanding of computers and programming. Despite being the business manager of the company with a minor in programming, he fancied himself an expert and often created problems for his staff. His attempts at programming revealed his incompetence to Dave. Dave decided to create a web page to post the pictures he had taken of Tony and Sandy. He would then email himself the link to the page, pretending to discover their affair. To do this, he needed to hack into Tony's home or office computer and use it to set up the page with Tony's name, address, and personal information. That afternoon, Dave went to an internet cafe and started by hacking into Tony's home computer. Before setting up the web page, he scanned the hard drives to see what he could find. Jackpot. He discovered pictures of Tony with several women, including 2 who were married to men working with Dave. Dave quickly began working on the web page, copying the folder of pictures to his own machine. He named the page Lie to T and posted links to it from various adult websites and several other harmless sites. It took him several days to finish programming and make the website live. Every action had to be performed through Tony's computer at home to make it appear as though Tony was behind the work. There were days when Dave couldn't work on the site due to personal reasons, or because Tony had turned off his computer. After launching the website, he began devising other methods of retaliation. A few days later, Dave sent out an email containing the website link to everyone he could find who knew Tony, Sandy, or any of the other women. This was supposedly how he learned of Sandy's infidelity. Upon receiving the email, Dave confronted Sandy, who responded with all the typical excuses from the cheater's handbook. "I'm sorry, honey. It meant nothing. It was just that one time. I ran into him when my sister and I went out for a meal," and so on. The next morning, Dave drove to work and confronted Tony before resigning on the spot. He left Tony with bruises on his face, back, and head from Dave's punch and Tony's fall to the floor. The divorce quickly turned contentious, with Sandy initially trying to reconcile but then filing a countersuit. As tensions escalated, she sought revenge on Dave for daring to divorce her by reporting him to the prosecuting attorney for running an online gambling site. The website had started as a hobby for Dave and his friends to play online Texas Hold'em. It quickly expanded, and Dave made it accessible to people worldwide. Each player received 2,000 chips, with no real monetary value upon joining, and an additional 1,000 chips daily as a bonus. Initially, if players lost all their chips, they couldn't play again until the next day. 2 months after the site went live, Dave, as the administrator, received so many requests for additional chips that he set up a system for users to purchase more and keep playing. Although it wasn't a gambling site per se, because no one ever received anything tangible in return for their payments, other than the right to continue playing with the chips they had or bought. Dave had been running the site for over a year and was making a substantial profit from it when his marriage fell apart. When he discovered that Tony was having an affair with Sandy, he was on the verge of quitting his job to focus entirely on the website. But he wanted to finish the project he and Dean were working on first. Over the past year, he had expanded the site to include additional card games and even slot machines. He was astonished by the amount of money people sent him to buy chips, only to end up losing them and acquiring more chips. He was now relieved that all purchases were directed into a bank account in the Cayman Islands. He was incorporated and only drew a minimal salary from the company. As far as he knew, no one was aware that he was the sole owner of the company. He knew Sandy believed he was just a contract programmer. He was glad he had structured it this way. While Sandy might be able to claim a portion of his modest salary from the web company, it was unlikely. Since leaving Tony's company, he actually earned less than she did. During the divorce proceedings, Sandy reported Dave to the police for operating an online casino. The authorities investigated and questioned him twice, but since he was merely an employee and none of the players received anything tangible for their money, other than chips to continue playing, they found no grounds for prosecution. Sandy's attempt to get him in trouble only fueled his resentment, making him more stubborn about the divorce. After 7 months of contentious negotiations, the divorce was finalized. Dave was required to provide minimal support to Sandy for 3 years, given that he was still employed at the time of filing. Sandy agreed to accept a lump sum instead of monthly payments, and Dave was finally free. He was eager to leave the town where his life had unraveled. Dave packed all his belongings into his truck and a 14-foot trailer before hitting the road with no particular destination in mind. One of his first stops was a pleasant river where his grandfather and father had taken him fishing in the past. They used to camp on a gravel bar, catch and clean fish, and eat them right there. Just thinking about it made his mouth water. Dave found the gravel bar and set up camp just in time for the evening fishing. The fish were biting, and he had a great time, quickly forgetting his troubles and starting to enjoy his time on the river. He spent 2 days camping, swimming, and fishing before running out of drinks and supplies. Leaving the camp set up, he drove to the nearest town with a grocery store. Although the town was small, with a population of about 850, it had a quaint mom-and-pop grocery store and a cafe where the local farmers gathered whenever they had the chance. It was somewhat disheartening for Dave to drive through the town. He recalled it being much larger and more bustling during his youth. Many of the once grand older houses were now vacant, and numerous smaller homes were empty and in disrepair. Several for sale signs adorned the vacant properties, and Dave wondered how long they had been on the market. Some of the yards looked like they hadn't been mowed in years. One of the most impressive and sizable houses from the past was now entirely obscured by overgrown trees and brush. Only occasional glimpses of metal from the roof were visible through the dense foliage. This house had belonged to a doctor who worked at the local hospital, now closed, which once had 40 beds and was often full. Now it stood as just another empty building on the town's main street. A poignant sight. Dave was surprised to discover that the small, privately owned phone company was still operational. It had old equipment when his grandfather had a small cabin nearby years ago. Curious about its current state, Dave decided to have a meal at the local cafe before buying groceries. To his astonishment, he found that the phone company had modernized and now offered internet and cable TV services. After enjoying a delicious burger, Dave went outside to his truck to grab his computer. He quickly set up at a quiet table and began working on his website, catching up on maintenance tasks he couldn't handle while using his phone as a hotspot on the river. Throughout the afternoon, he received several curious glances but wasn't disturbed, aside from a waitress asking if he needed anything. He managed to finish all his work. When he closed his laptop, the cafe owner approached and said, "We don't usually see that here. I've been contemplating canceling our internet service since only a few kids use it. I haven't seen you around before. If you don't mind me asking, what were you working on for so long? I heard you typing a lot, more than just casual browsing. Are you new in town?" "Not at all. I don't mind sharing. I'm camping by the river while I recover from a tough divorce. My grandfather and I used to fish and camp nearby when I was a kid, and I wanted to revisit those memories to help me relax. As for my work, I run a website and was doing some maintenance that's difficult to manage with just a phone hotspot. I hope that was okay." "That's fine. We installed the internet partly for us and partly to attract customers. The phone company offered me a basic video package for free if I agreed to pay for the internet service, so I took it." "How long will you be around?" "I'm not sure. I'll stay until I feel like moving on. I have everything I own in my truck or trailer. After the divorce, I left my old home and planned to keep driving until I found a place I wanted to settle down. This is my first stop, and so far, I haven't felt ready to leave." "Wow, living freely. Must be nice." "It is, but I've always hoped to find a place and work that I love, put down roots, meet a good woman, and start a family. So far, that hasn't worked out, so I'm still wandering." "Well, good luck. I need to get back to the kitchen. Let me know if you need anything else." Dave watched as the woman turned and walked back towards the kitchen. Just before she entered, he called out, "Hey, if you don't mind, could you bring me a salad, another burger, and some fries? Also, what time does the grocery store close?" "Sure, honey. I'll get that for you. You might want to head to the store before you eat, though. They close at 6 and it's already 5:30. You might not finish your dinner in time otherwise. If you want, I can wait a few minutes before cooking so you can get your groceries." Dave smiled and replied, "Thanks, I'll do that. I'll be right back." And he got up and headed for the door. Dave walked down the street for about a block and entered the small grocery store. He quickly made his way through the aisles, picking up items from his list, such as canned soup, bread, chips, and a few cans of vegetables. He then went to the coolers and grabbed some lettuce, cheese, lunch meat, and a couple of small steaks. Like most small-town stores, the prices were notably higher than in the big cities, but considering the cost of fuel, they were reasonable. He quickly paid for his items and returned to his truck, placing the cold items in his cooler. His truck had an inverter that kept things cool without needing ice. His small camping generator on the trailer kept the batteries charged, providing power for use on the river, as well as lighting at night and charging his computer and phone. Dave entered the cafe once more and smiled upon seeing his host bringing a salad to the table he'd been using throughout the day. She placed the salad dressing and some crackers in front of his chair and said, "Here you go. I put your burger on when I saw you loading your groceries into the truck. It should be ready soon. By the time Dave finished his meal, a few other customers had arrived in the small cafe. Some alone, a few couples, and one family. When he paid, the woman thanked him for his business and said, "I hope you come back again. It was nice to have someone here in the afternoon. It gets kind of lonely some days. If you're around on Sunday, you should join us for lunch. My special is always fried chicken with all the fixings, though we still have the regular menu items too. You know, I just might do that." "Thanks," Dave replied before heading out. A few days later, Dave returned to town and went straight to the cafe. As he walked in, he inexplicably paused to look at the bulletin board next to the cash register. There was a list of properties for sale and another list on county letterhead detailing properties going up for auction on the courthouse steps, due to back taxes. The auction was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Twyla, the cafe owner, noticed him glancing at the list and greeted him with a smile. "Nice to see you back, Dave. How have you been?" "I'm good, Twyla. Just needed some groceries and thought I'd stop by for another one of your great burgers." "Great. Do you want it now, or would you prefer to wait a bit?" "I think I'll wait," he replied, lifting his computer case. "I was hoping to work for a while first, if that's okay with you." "Sure thing. Can I get you anything in the meantime?" "Yeah, some unsweetened iced tea would be great." When Twyla brought his tea, she asked, "I saw you looking at the bulletin board. Were you searching for something or just browsing?" "Mostly just browsing. I started with the auction flyers, and then noticed all the properties for sale. I'm surprised by how many are being sold for back taxes. It looks like there are 3 or 4 places here." "Yes, there are. The same ones year after year, though sometimes a new one pops up. One of them is old Doc Fisker's place. It's been on the list for 6 years now, and no one has bid on it. As far as anyone knows, he didn't have any family left when he passed, and no one seems interested in buying the house. It's not too surprising, though. There are several properties for sale in town, and maybe 1 or 2 sell each year." "Where's his house, Twyla?" "You pass it when you drive into town. In fact, you can almost see the yard from here. Those trees on the hillside by the creek, sometimes you can catch a glimpse of the roof when the sun hits it just right." "Yeah, I see it. It looks like a pretty big house." "I'm surprised no one wants it. It used to be not only the largest house in town, but also the fanciest. I'm not sure about its condition now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in pretty rough shape. Kids might have broken in and caused some damage. Some of the other empty houses have actually burned down from kids getting inside and smoking, which led to fires." Dave couldn't quite explain why, but he felt drawn to the large house concealed by the overgrown yard. He was more relaxed and, surprisingly, happier in this small town than he had been in months or even years. While working, he often found himself daydreaming about the old house and the tax sale. Eventually, Dave managed to refocus on his work. Around 1 in the afternoon, he shut down his computer and leaned back in his chair. Twyla, seeing him, called from the kitchen. "Ready for lunch now, Dave?" "Yeah. Thanks, Twyla. I think I'll go with another salad and burger, but could I get onion rings with the burger today?" "Sure thing. I'll be right out," she replied. While waiting for his meal, Dave chatted with a couple of farmers who had stayed after lunch. One of them asked, "I've seen you around here for a couple of weeks. Did you move nearby or something?" "Not exactly. I left my cheating wife, quit my full-time job when I found out she was with my boss, packed up everything I had, and left. My grandfather used to bring me here to fish in the summer, so I just camped on the same old gravel bar we used to use, and I'm trying to relax. I come in occasionally for groceries and one of Twyla's burgers. I use her internet to handle some work that I can't manage with my phone as a hotspot." "You said you quit your job. What kind of work can you do from the cafe?" "I ran an internet gaming site as a side gig and still manage it. I handle my housekeeping here and keep the site updated so I still make a bit of money." "Huh. I don't really understand all that. I guess you're one of those techie types I've heard about. Say, are you the one living in that old box trailer by the river?" "Probably. I hope I haven't upset anyone. Nah. Joe's used to people parking and fishing on that gravel bar. Everyone's been doing it for years. As long as you don't cause any damage or let his cows out, he doesn't mind. After that, the two farmers paid their bill and left. Seeing Twyla cashing them out, Dave decided it was time to go. He settled his bill, picked up his groceries, and loaded them into his truck. As he began to leave town, he inexplicably stopped when driving past the old doctor's house. Dave was determined to see the old house. It was a struggle to push through the overgrown brush, but he managed to get there. The house, described locally as a 1.5-story dwelling, featured a full ground floor and a finished attic. Though he couldn't see how many rooms were in the attic, he was confident there were a few. The house showed signs of age, with rotting boards on the walls, wooden porches, and windows. It was clear that the house was in desperate need of a fresh coat of paint. Despite the old single-pane wooden windows, none of the glass appeared to be broken. The building had a mostly shiny galvanized metal roof. Feeling a bit guilty, Dave found an open window and climbed inside. He spent nearly an hour exploring and inspecting the place. From what he could tell, the structure of the house was still in good shape, and the layout was better than many old homes. There were also 2 outbuildings, a detached 2-car garage and a small barn, situated on what seemed to be a 4 or 5 acre lot. After finishing his inspection, he made his way out of the yard, climbed into his truck, and returned to his trailer by the river. Over the next 3 days, Dave frequently thought about the old house and his fondness for the small town. On Monday morning, he ventured into town again and stopped by the old house. He retraced his previous steps into the property and once more examined the buildings and grounds. There was something about the house that drew him in, and he found himself sitting on the old porch steps, gazing into the overgrown front yard. By noon, Dave headed back to his truck and drove the short distance to the cafe for lunch. As she took his order, Twyla smiled and asked, "What do you think about Doc's old house?" "Huh? Come on, Dave. I can see the place clearly from here, and I saw you stop by last week and again this morning before you came in. Heck, half the town knows you've been poking around it. So, what do you think?" "I'm not sure. There's something about the place that pulls me in, but it looks like it would require a lot of work to make it livable again. Just cleaning up the yard would be a major undertaking, and the whole house needs modernizing. There are a lot of rotten boards to replace, and I won't know about the framing until I can remove some siding or wall boards. From what I can see, it will need to be completely rewired and replumbed. I just don't know. Yeah, that's probably why no one else has bid on it. Plus, no one wants to live out here in the sticks anymore. So do you want another burger or something else today?" "Yes, I'll have the burger and rings again, please, Twyla." As Dave waited for his lunch, he repeatedly glanced at the old house, not even bothering to log onto his website during the wait. Throughout his meal, his gaze remained fixed on the house, and he had to make a conscious effort to eventually log onto his computer to finish the few remaining tasks. After completing his work, he decided not to go grocery shopping, but instead returned to his camp. He spent the rest of the day working on his computer, managing his finances, updating records, and programming scenery changes for his website. With over 50,000 players on his site, who each spent an average of $5 weekly on chips, the site's revenue was on track to reach around $13,000 USD annually. Depending on the year and equipment costs, his profits typically ranged between 15–20% of the gross income. Dave had a restless night and was up shortly after dawn. As he sipped his coffee and watched the sunrise through the trees, he reflected on his life and the day ahead. Without giving it much thought, he filled his large insulated cup with coffee, hopped into his truck, and drove to town. This time he skipped the turnoff to the small town and continued down the highway to Knott City, the county seat. He found a parking spot and made his way toward the courthouse just after 9:30 a.m. After confirming the location for the upcoming tax and foreclosure sale, he waited patiently. Exactly on time, the sheriff arrived with two men in suits, accompanied by a tall, lean figure dressed in worn Levi's and a blue Western-style chambray shirt. His outfit was completed by cowboy boots and a white Stetson hat. The newly arrived group surveyed the small crowd of about 6 people who had gathered nearby before the sheriff addressed them. "Good morning, everyone. We're about to auction off some foreclosed properties and a few that are delinquent on taxes. If that's why you're here, please come closer, and we'll get started." A few people moved away while the rest approached the men. The auctioneer took the stage with his microphone and accepted a paper from one of the suited men. He read the document, then provided details about the property, including its address, payment requirements, and starting bid. The foreclosed properties were auctioned off first, and most bidders left, leaving only Dave and 2 others. The rules for the tax sales were distributed before the first property was described, and the second part of the auction began. 2 farms were sold, and then Dave observed as the other 2 bidders decided to leave. The men glanced at Dave, and one of them asked, "Are you here for the sale, sir?" "Yes. All the land has been sold. We only have a few old abandoned houses left. Are you interested in one of those?" "Yes, I might be a bit crazy, but I'm interested in an old house in Thomasville." One of the men shuffled through the remaining papers and asked, "Which one are you referring to, sir? We have 3 parcels in Thomasville." Dave provided the address, and the man reviewed the paperwork for Doc's house. After examining it, he said, "The taxes on that property amount to $1,575, which includes a 9-year arrears. This year's taxes will be due before December 31st. The minimum bid is the tax balance, sir." Without hesitation, Dave responded, "I bid $1,575. The men glanced around, and the auctioneer performed his usual routine before declaring, "Sold for $1,575. Dave spent the remainder of the day in town, finalizing the purchase, completing paperwork like deeds, recording the deed, and even changing the address to make it his permanent residence. He also registered to vote and visited the power company to arrange for electric service. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon before he left the store and headed back to Knott City. He parked near the cafe and walked into the cool interior. As soon as he sat at his table, Twyla approached him and asked, "What can I get you tonight, Dave?" "I think I'll have one of your chicken fried steaks with potatoes, gravy, and green beans, please." "You got it. Where have you been all day? I didn't expect to see you for a couple more days since you were here yesterday." "Spent the day in town and didn't feel like cooking when I got back to camp." Dave finished his meal as soon as Twyla brought it, paid the bill, and returned to the campsite. He parked, stripped down, and took a refreshing swim in the cool water for a relaxing afternoon. After swimming, he packed away most of his gear that had been left scattered around, as most was already secured from being away all day, and watched the sunset. The next morning, after a quick breakfast and coffee, Dave completed packing his gear, hooked the trailer to the truck, and drove to town to his new house. Within an hour of starting work, several people had stopped to chat with him. Some even watched for a few minutes while he cleared the brush and undergrowth from what was left of the driveway. It took all day to clear the driveway and create a large enough space to park his truck and trailer. He finally positioned the trailer where he wanted it and unhooked it. He grabbed his ditty bag and headed to the creek at the edge of his property. There was a chest-deep hole that was easy to access, so he waded out for a nice bath before returning to his trailer, changing out of his wet shorts and putting on clean clothes. After finishing dressing, Dave walked the almost 2 blocks to the cafe. By the time he arrived, there were already several tables occupied by customers eating or waiting for their meals. Dave chose his usual table by the front window and smiled when Twyla approached with a glass of water. She set the water on the table in front of him, smiled, and said, "Well, you're definitely the talk of the town now. I can't believe you bought that old house. Isn't it in pretty rough shape? I've seen worse, but I think it has good potential. I'll invest a lot into fixing it up. But once it's done, it'll be a nice place. I could really use some help, though." Do you know anyone who might be willing to help me with stripping it down and cleaning up the yard? I might. Have you checked the bulletin board? Sometimes there are useful notices there. I noticed you moved your trailer into the yard. Are you going to be around working on it now? Yeah, I'll be here for quite a while. I plan to handle as much of the work myself as possible. It took Dave nearly 2 hours to finish his meal and leave the cafe. Almost every male in the building, along with a few of the females, stopped by his table to chat about the old house. He even received a few leads on potential helpers. Dave wasn't in a rush to complete the house renovations, so he didn't hurry to hire help. While money wasn't a major issue, it was still a factor. His income was based in the Caymans, and he paid himself a small salary through his company to avoid U.S. taxes on the funds he kept offshore. If he used business funds for the renovations, he'd end up paying tax on any excess amounts. One morning, Dave was relaxing under his favorite beer-drinking tree, taking a break from his labors, when 2 young women strolled into the yard and greeted him with cheerful smiles. Dave was nearly speechless when he saw them. Both were tall for women, around 5 feet 8 inches, and incredibly cute. He had seen them around town before. The blonde occasionally worked at the cafe, and he had noticed the Hispanic girl chatting and laughing with her there, though he didn't know their names. Both women had their hair pulled back in ponytails and were wearing short, tight cutoffs that revealed a hint of their appealing backsides and a slight camel toe. Their tight-fitting tops left no visible bra straps. They seemed almost to be vibrating with energy, and the blonde greeted him first. "Hi, Dave. We've noticed you working hard and heard you mention needing some help, but we haven't seen anyone assist you. We both work part-time at the cafe for our mom, but don't earn much. Tina and I were wondering if you'd consider hiring us. Are you Twyla's daughters? I've seen you around but didn't realize who you were." The blonde giggled and said, "Yep, I'm Jan, short for Janice, and this is Tina. We're twins and do everything together." Dave looked at the 2 distinct-looking girls and asked, "Twins?" Jan laughed and responded, "Well, not exactly. We have different parents, but we're sort of twins. We were born on the same day, just 20 minutes apart in the same hospital, so we call ourselves twins. We've been best friends forever. I have considered hiring some help, but haven't gotten around to it yet. There are several tasks that would be easier with assistance, but I'm short on cash and have been putting it off. I'm not in a rush to finish the work. I just want to move in before it gets cold this fall." The 2 girls exchanged brief glances before Tina spoke. "Anything we can do would be very helpful. We're both going to college this fall, and we need to earn as much as we can. We don't have much experience in construction, but we'll be happy to learn if you show us how it's done." "Well, I could use some help myself. I remember what it was like to be a college student experiencing difficulties. What course are you in and what is your specialty?" Yang replied, "We are moving on to the 2nd year. I want to become an elementary school teacher, and Tina is studying something related to computers." After a few more minutes of conversation, Jen said, "We have to go. We promised our mom that we would help today. See you later." Dave watched as 2 attractive girls walked down the street and entered a cafe. He thought, "Damn it, what wouldn't I give to be with her?" As soon as they were out of sight, he returned to his work. He replaced the old windows with plastic ones with triple glazing. The size of each window opening had to be changed to match the standard-sized windows, which was much cheaper, but required significantly more time than custom-made. Shortly before noon, Dave finished work and headed to a cafe for lunch. When he entered and headed to his usual table, Jan and Tina greeted him joyfully. Twyla started to go to his table, but when she noticed the girls, she smiled and returned to the kitchen, from where they had just left. "Hi, Dave," Tina greeted happily. "What can we cook for you today?" "I'll have chicken Philly with enchilada and iced tea, please." Jen smiled and said, "I'll serve it now. You'll like it." It was cooked by Tina and her mom, and their cooking is just fantastic. After finishing his meal, Dave walked over to the register to pay. He smiled as Twyla greeted him and said, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, but those two sure made a beeline for you this afternoon. I usually have to tell them to wait if I'm busy in the kitchen with Tina's mom. I've seen them here before, but today was the first time I actually met and talked to them. They came up asking for a job and said you'd sent them. What? You're joking. No, I didn't suggest they ask you for a job. I just mentioned that you had been talking about hiring someone part-time to help with the heavier work. I can't believe they asked to help with your remodel. I wouldn't call them lazy, they're not, but they are very picky about the kind of work they'll do. They help here occasionally, but they complain about it all the time. I can't believe they want to take on the tough work you'd need them for. So you wouldn't recommend them then? Not exactly. If you give them a job, they'll do their best to get it done right, and will give you a fair day's work for their pay. I'm just surprised they were willing to take on the work and approached you about it. Oh. I didn't say anything about hiring them. I've been trying to handle as much as I can on my own to save money, but I'll need some help soon. Do you think they're strong enough for the heavy work? Do they even know anything about construction? Jan doesn't, but Tina's dad is a contractor, and she used to go to job sites with him when she was younger. I expect she knows quite a bit. So, how was your meal? You surprised me by not ordering your usual hamburger today. Dave chuckled and said, "That was really good. I still enjoy your burgers, but I wanted to try something different. I'm a fan of good Tex-Mex. It would have been perfect with some chips and salsa. We've considered adding that, but we'd need to charge a bit more, and we couldn't just serve them early like they do in Mexican restaurants. I understand, but to me it's an essential part of a Mexican meal. You should also work on a great pizza. I don't like having to drive to the county seat whenever I want pizza." Twyla laughed and responded, "You're asking for a lot, aren't you? We can't offer such a wide variety in a small place like this. Maybe you'd like to come work here and cover the cost of all that extra inventory?" Dave laughed and replied, "No, not really. I was just making a suggestion." Twyla smiled as Dave got up to return to work. She followed him to the register, took his payment, and then they both went their separate ways. The next morning, Dave had just started his workday when Jan and Tina arrived, dressed in the same outfits as the previous day. "Hey, Dave," Tina greeted. "What are we doing today?" Dave frowned before replying, "Well, I was planning to finish repairing the siding so I can start painting it in the next day or two. What about you two?" Jan looked a bit guilty or perhaps apprehensive and said, "We'll do whatever you need. We're open to trying anything." Dave was unsure how to respond. It seemed like the girls thought he was going to hire them or had already hired them. Unsure of what to say or do, he stood there for a moment. The girls began to look worried and even started to turn to leave when Dave finally said, "If you're sure you want to help, I could use it, but you're not dressed for anything too dirty or strenuous." Dave surveyed the work that needed to be done and had an idea. He was currently working on the back of the house, replacing damaged siding and boards. But the rest of the exterior was ready for painting. He had already removed the old loose paint and smoothed the edges, so all that was left was painting. "Here's the deal," he said. "I'm still working on the back of the house, but if you want to paint the exterior, you can do that. The paint is on the front porch, and as you can see, I still have the scaffolding set up on the side so I can start from the top." The girls beamed and nearly bounced with excitement. Dave was mesmerized by their unrestrained breasts bouncing within their snug tops. Jan said, "Come on, Tina, let's get started." They turned and quickly headed towards the front of the house to begin their new task. Dave could never predict how long the girls would work each day, or if just one of them would show up. When one or both weren't present, he usually found them working at the cafe during his lunch break. Naturally, he didn't spend all his time on the house either, as he needed to work on his website occasionally. Sometimes he even had small programming jobs that diverted him from the restoration work. He chose to work from the cafe since his internet wasn't set up at home yet, as the house was still unfinished. By the end of the first week, the girls had painted one side and the front of the house. They applied 2 coats, and it looked fantastic. They also became close friends with Dave, who suspected they were playfully teasing him with their attractive bodies. There were numerous oops moments when he could see down their tops due to their loose blouses, and on several occasions, one of them wore a mini skirt to climb ladders and paint. On Friday, at the end of their first full week, Dave invited them to the backyard, where they usually rested under his beer tree. He did his best to keep track of their working hours and arbitrarily set an hourly rate since they did not discuss payment. When the girls came and took their seats, as he invited them, he handed each of them a wad of cash and said, "This is your payment for the last week and a half. We have never discussed payment, so I asked about the current rate for the work you have done. I hope this will satisfy you." To his surprise, none of the women looked at the money and counted it. Instead, each of them stuffed the cash into the pockets of their tight shorts, for which they had to stand up. As soon as the money was received, they both jumped up, bent down, and kissed him, which was much more than just gratitude. Tina was sitting on one side of him and Ian was on the other with his hand on his shoulder. Tina said, "Thanks, Dave. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with the payment, but you didn't have to do it. We never asked for payment. We just wanted to help you. It's getting so boring here because most of our friends have left town and college classes are over. Besides," she added, snuggling closer to him, "we like being with you. Can we come over tomorrow and just hang out instead of working?" Sure, I think. I was planning to do some housework, but you really don't have to." "No, I mean, could you stop working and let us just hang out? Maybe have some fun?" Dave thought for a moment, then answered, "Of course, I suppose. I don't have any urgent deadlines. We have almost finished the outdoor work, and it can be completed long before the onset of cold weather. That was my main goal for the summer. I want to tidy up a couple of rooms inside so I can move in before winter. I'm sure I can handle it, so a day off is not bad." Both girls smiled and gave him a tighter hug before they sat back down. They all had a few beers together before the girls had to leave to clean up and help Twyla at the cafe with the Friday night rush. Dave had to adjust himself after they left thanks to the kisses and the way they rubbed against him. Watching them walk away didn't help at all. The next morning, Dave was still sitting outside with his coffee when the two girls arrived. They appeared around the corner of his house carrying a cooler between them and a sack of what looked like groceries in each hand. They quickly walked up to him, dropped their things, and gave him a quick kiss. Dave nearly spilled his coffee when they kissed him and asked, "Wow, what's this for?" Jan gave him a curious look before asking, "Didn't you like it? We're sorry if it surprised you." Tina, looking a bit down, was met with Dave's quick response, "No, it's not that at all. You just caught me off guard. What sane single man wouldn't enjoy being kissed by two beautiful women? What did you bring?" "I thought we were just hanging out. I feel bad now because I didn't prepare anything special." "Don't worry about it. We brought some drinks and supplies for burgers and hot dogs. We noticed how much you enjoy Mom's burgers at the cafe, so we thought we'd have a cookout. Hope that's okay with you." "Of course it's fine. So what's on the agenda for today, since it's your party?" "Not much, really," Jan replied. "Like we said, just hanging out, having some drinks, swimming a lot, and grilling the burgers and hot dogs." She took his hand and tried to pull him out of his chair. "Come on," she said. "Let's go swimming. It's already too hot to just sit around with coffee." Dave let himself be pulled along and followed the laughing girls down the path from his yard toward the deep swimming hole at the back of his property. It was only about 150 feet away, and he could already hear people splashing and chatting loudly as they enjoyed the stream. He hesitated for a moment and said, Hold on. Let me at least grab my swim trunks." "Oh, come on," Tina said. "Those old shorts look fine to us. Besides, we don't want to wait. We're too hot." "Yeah, I can see that," Dave muttered. Jan smiled and asked, "What did you say? You think we're hot?" Yeah, but I'm sorry you heard that. I shouldn't have said it." "Nonsense. Of course you should. Every woman needs to know her man thinks she's hot, especially if he really means it. You did mean it, didn't you?" Tina nudged Jan on the shoulder and whispered, "Be quiet, you idiot." Dave was taken aback by what Jan and Tina had said, but decided he must have misunderstood and let them pull him toward the stream. Soon they were all swimming and splashing with the other couples in the water, though it seemed Jan and Tina spent most of their time chatting and playing with Dave. A few minutes later, Jan disappeared but quickly returned with 3 beers and some pool noodles for floating in the water. She handed a beer and a noodle to both Dave and Tina, then mounted her own noodle and started sipping her beer as she relaxed and chatted with everyone. Dave soon found himself joining in the conversation and getting to know the others in the water. To his surprise, he was enjoying himself more than he expected. Jan and Tina made several trips back to the yard for more beer, and at noon, sandwiches. As the sun began to set in the late afternoon, Jan announced, "Come on, you two, it's time for supper." By then, all 3 were feeling the effects of the beer and found everything amusing. Most of their friends had already left, and those who remained were either preparing or enjoying their evening meals on the bank. On the way back up the path, Dave walked between the 2 women who had their arms around each other's waists, their hips brushing together as they walked. By that point, they had all had enough to drink that everything seemed funny. Jan grinned, looked up at Dave, and with a giggle said, "You can't even walk straight. How are you going to handle us, Davy? Remember, you've got to cook the burgers. We need to grill them and then have a party." After Ian finished speaking, Tina pulled Dave's head towards her and before he could react, kissed him hard and sloppily. Then she looked at Ian and said, "I'm not sure about the burgers, but he's already made 1 hot dog for us." Dave tried to push her hand away, muttering, "Stop it. What are you doing? What would your mom say if she saw this? You're drunk and—" His words were cut off when Jen silenced him with another kiss. After that, each of the girls took Dave by the hand and dragged him into the yard, sitting him down on his usual chair. Tina handed Dave another beer while Yana lit a gas grill nearby. When the grill was ready, the women began unpacking food from the refrigerator and the bags they had brought with them. They quickly set the food in paper plates on a small table, then took a beer for themselves and joined Dave while the grill was warming up. As soon as Jen decided that the grill was hot enough, she said, "Dave, I think the grill is ready, and you can start cooking burgers and hot dogs. We'll make buns for the meat." He and Tina giggled as they headed to the table to make buns. Soon they were enjoying burgers, fried potatoes, and excellent barbecue beans that Jen had brought from her mom's cafe. After dinner, they cleaned themselves up and returned to the stream to swim late in the evening. By the time they arrived, everyone else had already left, and they were alone in the pool. Their swim quickly turned into a playful game with lots of kisses. After cooling off, they all headed back to Dave's yard, where the girls immediately began to push him into the tent and put him on the bed. Dave was lying in the gathering dusk with 2 beautiful young women on either side of him. Without thinking, he hugged them and asked, puzzled, "Girls, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?" They both sat up to look into his eyes, and Ian replied, "We noticed that you've been watching us in the cafe almost since the first day you started coming here. You've never been rude or obnoxious like most of the guys and young people we've dated. And Mom really likes you. Neither here nor in college have we found anyone we liked enough to meet more often than once or twice. You're the exception. We spent the whole summer with you, and you always treated us well. We wanted to establish a relationship with you and see if there was potential in it, but since you never asked, we decided to take the initiative ourselves." "Okay, I can understand that, considering how much my wife offended me. I didn't dare to get involved in this case again, especially since you are almost 5 years younger than me. I didn't think you'd be interested even if I asked. Actually, you're wrong. It was and remains very interesting for us. Look, I do not know what to say. I really like both of you, and it's nice to be with you. The thought of having to choose between you is overwhelming." The girls smiled and hugged him. Then Tina said, "Good. We don't want you to choose. As twins, we do everything together, and we don't want you to have to choose. You're going to have to work with both of us, Dave." Eventually, the women noticed that Dave stopped reacting and seemed to relax. They looked up and saw that Dave had fallen asleep peacefully, and they continued to touch him. Jan noticed. Well, that's disappointing. I can't believe he fell asleep right in front of us. Are we really that boring? Tina chuckled before saying, either that or we gave him too much beer, but he's been working pretty hard too. Yeah, but what now? How about we go to sleep? Tina smiled and adjusted herself, getting cozy with her head resting on Dave. Soon, all three of them were asleep, and none of them woke until early the next morning. Dave woke up before the girls and worked to free his arms from their hold so he could rush to the bathroom. His head throbbed, his mouth felt dry, his stomach churned, and he was so parched he thought he might never drink enough to feel satisfied. He quickly brewed a pot of coffee, trying to recover from his day off. Before he had finished his first cup of coffee, both women stumbled out of his tent. They didn't say a word as they hurried into the house to use the bathroom. Shortly after, they emerged again, each pouring a cup of coffee before sitting down and gazing at Dave while they sipped the magical brew. After they finished with the pot, and exchanged only a few words, Dave looked at the women and said, "You two are quite a handful. I'm heading over to the cafe for some breakfast. Want to join?" They exchanged glances before Tina said, "Sure, but I don't think I'll be able to eat much." As the three young people made their way into the cafe, Twyla looked at them, laughed, and remarked, "You three look like you've had a rough night. I heard you were partying hard. I hope you've learned your lesson." Dave, settling into his usual chair with a young woman on either side, responded, "I take offense at that, Twyla. Contrary to rumors and someone's plans, I remain as innocent as ever. They tried to tempt me with strong drinks, but they failed to sway my morals." Jan blushed, slapped Dave's shoulder, and said, "Hey, that's my mom. You don't need to be telling her stuff like that. Besides, you weren't exactly putting up a fight before you fell asleep on us." Most of the male customers laughed at that, and Twyla said, "You girls didn't. Oh, forget it. What can I get you, Dave?" Dave placed his order, and Twyla headed toward the kitchen. Jan called out, "Mom, what about us?" Twyla replied, "If you want something, come with me and make it yourself. You're not paying customers." Jan and Twyla exchanged glances before they stood up and followed Jan into the kitchen at a slow pace. The sound of their muted conversation mixed with the usual kitchen noises was audible to everyone. While the food was being prepared, Dave endured a few minutes of light-hearted teasing from his friends and received some cautionary remarks about the women. Soon, Jan and Trina emerged from the kitchen with plates of food, which they carefully placed on the table before taking their seats and starting to eat. The group maintained minimal conversation as they tried to recover from their day of excessive partying. Dave finished his meal a bit earlier than the women and waited for them to finish. Once they were done, he got up and said, "I need to head home and recuperate. See you two later," before walking to the cash register. Twyla met Dave at the register and took his payment. As soon as he was outside, Jan and Tina joined him, one on each side, and wrapped an arm around his waist. He glanced at each woman but said nothing. He placed an arm around each of them as they all walked slowly back to his house. Upon reaching his backyard, Dave collapsed onto his bed and fell asleep almost immediately, barely noticing when the two women settled in beside him once more. They all slept in until nearly noon, and then, when nature called, they took turns in the bathroom. Afterward, they relaxed with some iced tea. Dave asked, "Were you girls just kidding around yesterday, or should I be concerned about what you said?" Jan responded, "What are you talking about? I don't remember much of our conversation. I remember laughing a lot and goofing around, but I don't recall the specifics of what we or anyone else said. You know, you both mentioned wanting to sleep with me." "Oh, that?" "Yeah. But you already knew that, didn't you?" "No, not really. I knew you were teasing me, and I was trying to decide which one of you I'd like to ask out. But that was about it." "Dave, I think we told you it doesn't work like that. We both really like you, and we share everything. Neither of us has found anyone else we care about, and we love each other like sisters. We both want you and don't want to hurt each other, so we agreed to share you. Is that a problem?" Well, yes, no, oh, hell, I don't know. I like you both a lot, but what about your parents and everyone in town? Tina replied, What about them? It's none of their business. We know we can't both marry you, but if we get along, there's nothing stopping us from both living with you. The girls continued assisting Dave with the renovations, increasingly taking charge of selecting paint, decor, and even handling finishing touches on the interior. The first room they completed was the kitchen, where Dave ended up following their exact preferences. After the kitchen, they worked on converting the old sitting room and butler's pantry into a master suite with a large master bath. Next, they tackled the formal living room and then the dining room. The final downstairs project was a smaller room, previously used as the doctor's office, which was transformed into a nursery child's room for future use. This completed the downstairs renovations just in time for their first family Thanksgiving meal. Over the winter, they turned their attention to the upstairs, which would feature 2 large bedrooms separated by a small game room and bathroom. Thanksgiving, one of the few days the cafe was closed, saw the entire extended family, Jan's and Tina's parents and siblings, along with Dave's parents, gathering at Dave's house for the traditional meal. The house was packed, and many were intrigued by the fact that Dave had 2 women living with him as wives. In no time, both the families and the town embraced their unconventional lifestyle, treating it as entirely normal. Dave and his partners were content and thriving. Jan and Tina both graduated from college. Jan secured a teaching position at the local school, and Tina began working with Dave on programming various games and apps for phones. Their financial success continued to grow.